Now this PC I have here is not only cheap, but it can also play games really well for the price. I picked up an FX 6300 plus the motherboard, plus the cooler and 16GB of DDR3 for €100, which is a pretty good deal in itself. I got the case for free, which is why it looks so ugly, but whatever, it's just there to hold components. I got the hard drive for free as well, because someone pulled it out of their old NAS and he said basically it was old, used and really slow by now. So I said, well, I'm happy to take it, I'm going to make a build with it. And that is exactly what I did. The power supply is actually a really good one. It's a 450 watt Be Quiet system power, and the only downside to it is that the only PCIe power connector it has is one single 8-pin. So you won't be able to connect more powerful graphics cards to it. Speaking of the GPU, it's an HD 7770, which is pretty old and does only have 1GB of VRAM, but I did get it for €36.50. Now, how much did I spend on this PC? €156.50. But I'm not done yet. I bought 8GB of DDR3 1600 and that cost me just €30. New total, €186.50. You might have noticed, now I'm stuck with 2 RAM kits. Well, I sold the first kit, the 16GB kit, for €70, which is why the motherboard and CPU and RAM combo was such a good deal. The new total is now at €116.50. So that's really damn cheap for a PC. I know, the case is ugly, there are no fans in there, the components get really hot, but I zip tied a fan to the back, some old, I think 80 or 90mm fan I found, and it works. It's loud, it doesn't look good, but it works. And that's all that matters in the end. So if you can get value for money, that's all that matters. Now, this is actually my first time using an FX CPU. So the Cinebench score of the CPU was 101 single core and around 450 multi-core. That is after I overclocked it to 4.4 GHz. The GPU, well, it was cheap and you can only really play 720p, but it was cheap. And for 720p, it's really good at what it does. Now, for benchmarks, I only tested a few games, mainly Skyrim Special Edition, just to set a baseline and compare overclocked versus non-overclocked results, whereby I did always run the CPU at 4.4 GHz and only compared the GPU overclock versus stock GPU. I ran all the Skyrim Special Edition tests at medium settings for a direct comparison between 720p and 1080p. And starting with 720p, we did get 43 FPS on average, 36 on the minimum, and once overclocked, we gained 9% more FPS with 47 on average and 39 FPS in the 1% low. Changing over to 1080p, well, barely not playable. 28 FPS on average and minimums of 20, which I consider not playable. However, once we overclocked the GPU, we saw a 14% improvement, upping our FPS from 28 to 32 and our minimums from 20 to 27, which now is playable in my opinion. Now for the 2 most played games right now, PUBG and Fortnite. At least I think so. Fortnite ran just fine at 1080p with high settings and delivering a smooth 63 FPS on average with a 1% low figure of 50 FPS. I am quite surprised by this, to be honest, because the GPU does only have 1GB of VRAM and running 1080p really smooth, no hiccups whatsoever. It did surprise me. PUBG was quite unplayable at 1080p, so I jumped straight to 720p, which, well, again, I'm quite surprised. 61 FPS on average and 40 FPS on a 1% lows. Which, considering the game is still very unoptimized, that's actually pretty impressive for a €36 GPU. Okay, so I already sold the PC by now, but the person coming to pick it up asked if it could run GTA 5, and I said, I don't know, but I'll test it. So I did test it, which ran just fine at 900p with 92 FPS average and 1% lows of 53. I thought about setting the graphics settings higher, but then we ran into VRAM limitations, so I guess you're just going to play with 92 FPS in GTA 5. Upping the resolution also was not possible since, well, again, we bumped into a VRAM limit. But this person also asked for a €135 PC, I sold it for that much, if he could stream GTA 5. At first I was like, well, what do you expect? No. So he wasn't interested anymore. Well, I wanted to sell it, so I said, okay, sure, I'll try it. Let me give it a try. So I did try it, and I was really surprised. It worked. You could stream GTA 5 at 720p, 30 FPS, but here's a preview. It worked just fine. No frame drops whatsoever. The stream was perfectly smooth, if you consider 30 FPS perfectly smooth. But if you're just watching for a stream, I think that's just fine. Also, on the player side, there was close to no difference in FPS. At least I didn't notice anything, which, well, I was playing at 92 FPS average anyway, so no lags or hiccups there. So, in the end, Fortnite and PUBG were both perfectly playable, and most importantly, the PC didn't choke out in battle. So, battles were perfectly smooth like the rest of the gameplay, which is really important if you want to play competitively. So, in conclusion, if you want to build a really cheap PC, I'm actually surprised how much performance you can extract out of so little money. So this is, I would say, excellent value for money. And, well, even though it is only 720p, I did use high anti-aliasing in PUBG and Skyrim, so it did look a little better than just 720p. And I really haven't thought of anything for an outro. So, bye, I guess?